Hello, I'm John Chivacco, the co-chair of the NY-GEO 2023 conference and a board member of the New York Geothermal Energy Organization. I'd like to welcome you to this recording of a live presentation from the conference, a two-day event which was held in Albany, New York on April 26th and 27th of 2023. This year's educational sessions and keynotes represent the latest in ground source heat pump system design, product innovations, and installation practices, along with important policy, regulatory, financing, and incentive updates. This presentation is one of over 40 sessions from the two-day event, all of which were recorded and available at NY-GEO's website, www.ny-geo.org, along with session descriptions and a link to download the slides from each of the sessions presented. NY-GEO is proud to make this content available to our members and other industry stakeholders, and if you are a member, thanks so much for your support and participation. If you find this content valuable and for some odd reason you are not yet a member, consider joining NY-GEO at the appropriate membership level with details available at our website. The live recording from the NY-GEO 2023 conference will start in just a moment. Thanks so much for listening.
All right, we're going to go ahead and get started. Before we have the panelists get into their presentations, just for overall context, the goal of this panel is to, as John set us up very well with his question at the end of the plenary, we're diving into all of the as yet not clear pieces of the IRA. So what are the questions that we're still waiting for answers on? What are the places where the industry is still trying to figure out how will we actually implement this? So just to get a sense of who we have for the audience here, how many of you are working for contracting companies that are doing geothermal drilling or HVAC installations? Okay, how many people are real estate developers or designers or a couple? And government? Great. Academia? Yeah, one in the back. All right. Thanks for that. We're going to run through the 4 presentations. We'll keep them to probably 5 to 8 minutes each to make sure we've got lots of time for questions at the end. So first up is going to be Dan. Let me pull up your presentation.
So I have a fair bit of material to cover. I'm trying, let's see, make sure I know how to run this thing. So you can, bottom line is you can get up to 30 to 50%. And there's a lot of details in that, and that's what we're here to talk about this morning. Are some of those details. So the base credits are quite a bit lower. In fact, it would take all the things put together to end up with the 10% we already had if we don't meet the requirement for a bonus credit. And there's 3 ways to meet it. One is that your system is less than a megawatt of thermal output, maximum net thermal output, important wording, or you can meet the prevailing wage in apprenticeship, which Jacob's going to cover that, and also or you started it before January, or commenced it prior to January 29th. And there are some projects that were underway in that. So, basically the difference of meeting any one of those 3 is 6% becomes 30, 2 becomes 10, 2 becomes 10. So you could go from as little as a 10% credit or even a 6% credit up to a maximum of 50%. So, first one is maximum net output. GEO has weighed in and provided response to requests from Treasury for information about, and Doug spoke to this if you're in the last session. We did a study and we tried to do it as scientifically as possible. We used Dr. Liu and Dr. Spittler from OSU, and we used DOE's Energy Plus software. We used GOE's prototype building models. And we used ASHRAE 90.1 sizing requirements for their baseline buildings in 90.1. We put that in 13 U.S. climate zones, and we took the 4 major building types that we tend to do geothermal in, which was, high-rise, multifamily, secondary size schools, large hotels, and larger office buildings. So we used those 4, we put them in all those climates, and we got an average diversity factor of 0.64, which means this, that not all the units in the building run at the same time. People are not in the cafeteria, the gym, and all the classrooms at the same time. You know, the sun isn't on the east, west, south, all at the same time. You know, the occupancy changes, the power density of plug load. So when you put all those in, you end up with that. Plus, you know, zone heat pumps are picked to meet the zone, and per ASHRAE 90.1, you're supposed to go 15% above the maximum peak cooling load, so you're automatically 15% oversized. And then usually you got to pick the next size heat pump you can actually buy. Okay, if you're in little condos, you know, you might have a load of 13,000. You know, you might have to go up to a 15,000 or maybe even 18,000 to get a real heat pump you can buy. So when you put all that together, we end up with the calculation of 445 tons of a distributed heat pump system, which is heat pumps out in the zones, would equate to 1 megawatt of thermal output for the system. And that's thermal output of energy into the ductwork. And then the other way we looked at it was central plants. If you put in a central plant system like large water to water, where essentially you're replacing a central chiller or boiler system, well, the diversity of the zones is already baked into the sizing of a central plant. You know, you already take that into account. And so in that case, the conversion would be a 1.0 factor. And so that would be the 285 tons of capacity. So essentially, that's what we've submitted. We hope that we will hear back from them by midsummer. Right now, the safe ground is if you're below 285, you're fine. If you're above 445, you have to do it anyway. And if you're in that middle ground, you have to make a decision. I've heard some people say, I'm just going to design the geo part of this building to be less than 285 or whatever. But we hope that the solution or the answer to this comes out in the next few months. Domestic content, this is another one. We expect actually some answers soon, but it's 10% more of the credit. And if you're iron or anything made primarily of iron or steel, you know, anything structural that would hold anything up, we don't typically have anything like that in a geothermal heat pump system. But I would say your duct metal, you know, your unistrut, hanging rods, pipe clevises should, you know, if you use, any contractor can buy America versions of any of that, and they're not that much more expensive, so use that. We don't know that it'll get down to that level, but we're just being safe, but essentially that. And then your manufactured products, at least 40% of the content of manufactured products has to be domestically sourced. If you're using a manufactured product, it must be made in the USA. But within that product, 40% of it needs to be domestic content, which our industry would have no problem meeting. Now, there are two interpretations of that 40%. One is that you take all your manufactured products and at least 40% of them have to, in cost value, have to be made in the USA. But the other interpretation, because it says very clearly in the opening, any iron, steel, or manufacturing product must be made in the USA. And then it says the total content of all those manufactured products has to be at least 40% US. So we're waiting for guidance on that, and that slowly steps up to 45, 50, and 55. And you will have to certify on a form to the IRS that we meet those. They're probably going to ask for some documentation, you know, probably manufacturer statements that we meet this and so on. It doesn't apply to anything that wasn't complete. They have to be completed this year. So it could even be started last year, but if it completes this year, you're eligible. And we expect some answers very quickly on this, mid-May, we hope. We were hoping we might have it for today, but we don't. Energy communities, you've heard about this. These are basically coal mine closed, coal power plant closed. It's an EPA brownfield site, or it's any MSA or non-MSA, which is, you know, more rural areas that had 0.17 or more direct employment related to the fossil fuel industry, basically. And it also says 25% of tax revenue. So, and then on top of that, and the big and down there, and it has to be over the national average unemployment rate the prior year to you starting your project. So when you put those two together, at first I wasn't even that interested in this part, but it gets to be a pretty big map. And I will show you that. We expect, IRS actually came out with some rules, but they left out two important parts. One is they said, well, we don't even know how to figure out how much tax revenue came locally from fossil fuel industry. So they basically have discounted that one and just looked at the employment, that at least 0.17% of the employment came from fossil fuel industry. So at that point, they're saying, until we figure out how to measure it, we'll get back to you on that. But the second one is, they haven't released the unemployment data. But they did produce some maps that you can go to. If you just basically get online and search for the energy community, DOE energy community maps, you will find these maps. And so as you can see, it covers a large part of the US. I mean, anything in blue or brown, shades of brown there, is one of these type areas. Anything in the brownish shades have to do with coal plant, power plant, or coal mining closures. And the bluish areas are all these MSAs that have employment that is over that threshold. But what's missing is we don't have the overlay of the employment rates yet. So when you're all done, you will have this map that they produce, but they said you can't rely on it to claim your tax credit. You can't attach the map and say, see, I'm in there. So, you know, you'll still have to do it, but they do actually have tabulated lists by counties for each state. So they actually have, when you go to their website, a tabular version of this map that delineates all these areas. And then EPA brownfield sites, they are not big. They are a property. You know, just like you're buying a piece of property, it's some property, or maybe it'd be multiple properties that something has happened that they're considered to be a brownfield site. Could be an old dry cleaning business was there, and, you know, had some fluids leak. Could be service stations that had underground storage tanks, whatever it might be. There's these, I couldn't find a great map on EPA's website. I find some on third parties, but they pretty much say refer to your state. Go to your state and they'll know the list of the brownfield sites. But if you happen to be on one, it's all this is another 10%. System cost basis, this comes up all the time. What's included in the system? Well, it's broad. Equipment which uses the ground or groundwater to, as a source to heat or cool a structure. Structure is a broad word. I mean, now I'm getting questions, like what, structure can be more, it's more than a building. It's some man-made thing that you need to heat and cool, and it serves a purpose for mankind, so it's a broader version. Equipment threw me off at first. Equipment is just anything you need. You load up a backpack with carabiners, rope, and all that. Every bit of that is equipment. Equipment doesn't mean some piece of machinery like we tend to think of it. Equipment is the things necessary to do a task, so it's a very broad term, legally. IRS capitalization rules says that when you capitalize an asset, it includes everything associated to get it there, the tax, the installing it. I mean, they actually make you put all these costs in there when you set up an asset. So these are all part of the cost base of the system, because what you enter on the tax form is, what is my basis in this property? And so the interpretation of all this since 2008 has been that includes pretty much everything from the well to the diffuser and everything in between, because it falls in those guidelines of what you would call part of the system from a tax standpoint. And it also would include an allocation of, the electrician, whatever cost to power those heat pumps is part of the cost basis. Like if you buy a machine in your plant, you got to wire it. It's part of the basis. So all I can say is since 2008, it has never been challenged, and IRS has never issued any notice dissenting or even commenting. They did issue a notice in 2015 asking for more information, said maybe we should think of some rules. And since 2015, there's been no response. And so we did submit GEO a bunch of information that pretty would codify these things if they accept it. But this is what's been going on. It's never been a problem. It's totally different than residential. Residential, somebody just said ductwork can't be included. I think that could be challenged, but nobody ever did, because, it's an essential part of the system. You can't heat or cool the structure if you don't have a distribution system. So, I think somebody that wrote that particular notice just put it in there and everybody just rolled over, or ignores it. Geothermal property, this is interesting. This law came up. This is the law from the 1978 to 82, and this is the part where they decided geothermal that we had wasn't hot enough, and they excluded us. But within that, they defined something called dual use, and this is coming up now because of hybrid. If you have a system that is not monovalent, if it's not 100% geothermal, now you have other energy coming in, And so essentially if that geothermal system is less than 75% of the annual energy input, and if you're an engineer, you would know, or anybody that's done things on even adding resistance heat to a residential geo unit, you can put, 10 kilowatts on a 3-ton unit, and that's higher than 25% in peak capacity, but over the season, it might only be 5 or 8% of the energy. So that would not be excluded. But it's based on annual energy input, and essentially if you start trying to put in 3 or 4 boreholes in the ground and mainly a big boiler, or essentially that's not going to be called a geothermal system. You can deduct your ground loop. You might even be able to deduct your heat pump, but your distribution system will be gone. The distribution system, anything that carries the other form of energy, would be subject to this rule of dual use. And again, we're just interpreting that this rule applies to us, but there's nothing else to follow. It's the only guidance we've had. They've not issued any more. And then interestingly, it says energy input or other inputs of energy. Well, a supplemental heat rejector is not inputting energy, it's getting rid of heat. So legally, I've sat around with some very knowledgeable people. They think that adding cooling towers would not affect this calculation of dual use, because you're just wasting heat. You're not, it's what they're worried about is fossil fuel coming in, bottom line. Third-party ownership, essentially, you have to own the property to take the tax credits. You have to be the owner of a property, and they have a limited use rule that says if you have one well field, let's say dedicated to one house or one school building or whatever that might be, you have one customer, one loop, they're saying you don't own it. And why? Because the IRS has decided if you can't repossess it, if they decided to not pay you, you have nothing. So they basically say you're just deemed to be a lender. And it doesn't matter if you try to sell them energy, if you're leasing it to them, it doesn't matter. You basically, and we are fighting this, and we are working to get this changed. The solar industry was able to get it changed, but they said, well, we can take the panels off after 30 years. Where are they going to go? Probably to the dump. I don't know, but they're basically, you can't dig a loop out. So this part is right now holding up third-party ownership for one-on-one, but it doesn't affect network systems. If you're serving multiple customers off of a well field, then everything's fine. It's just this one-on-one. And there's a lot of ways you could get creative to try to solve that. Stick a couple pipes out of your thing in the neighbor's yard, say he may hook up in the future. Now I have 2 potential customers, there's possible ways, but that's just some of the nuances of the law. And all of these we are waiting for more information.
Thank you, Dan.
Oh, sorry. There you go, sir. So one of the concepts that, one of the concepts that comes up is, when did your project start, and why is that important? The 5-time bonus that Dan was talking about, if you start it before 129, then you get the 5-time bonus automatically. You don't need prevailing wage, you don't have to be under a megawatt, you don't have to figure out if it's 445 or 284, you don't have to do any of that if you started your project before 129. Has anybody had projects that started before 129 that were placed in service in this year? So how do you determine if you started a project? There's 2 different tests, 2 different ways that you can qualify. One way is the 5% safe harbor. If you spent 5% on the project, and you had continuous activity at the job site, then you meet that you started your project in time. Now, there's another place where the start of construction is important, and that's for the energy community bonus right now. And I think there's an error there, but when that information came out on energy community, they said your project has to start in 2023. I think they're wrong, but IRS currently says your project has to start in 2023. So you would need to use these tools to determine if your project started at the right time, and that's the 5% safe harbor with continuity, or physical work at the site with continuity. And things that aren't included, I'm gonna read this. Planning or designing, securing financing, exploring, researching, obtaining permits, licensing, conducting surveys, environmental and engineering studies, or clearing a site. None of those things count as starting construction. It's things that happen after that that prove that you started construction. So it's important to know when you started your project, to know if you get that 5-time bonus, and potentially to know if you get that energy community bonus. Who was at my presentation yesterday? I can't use my Oprah moment. I wanted to say, you get a tax credit, you get a tax credit. I can't say that now. Direct pay 6417 allows government buildings, meaning state and local, and not-for-profits. And also, I had conversations with people that are involved in energy co-ops. So people involved in energy co-ops can get a direct payment now. Now, the part I'm going to focus in on is the part almost nobody talks about, and it's these haircuts. There are haircuts. This is not Section 48. This is not the ITC that lets you get these direct payments. It is 6417, and 6417 has its own separate rules. And those own separate rules have some haircuts. So one of the haircuts has 3 ways to not be haircut. And let me explain what I mean by a haircut. Let's say you qualify for a 40% credit, but you're subject to a 10% haircut. That doesn't mean you're down to a 30% credit. It means you're down to a 36% credit. So that's what I mean by a haircut. So there is a 10% haircut, and once again, there's that 1 megawatt. So if you had that small project under a megawatt, you don't have to do the haircut, no 10%. If you start your project in 2023, you don't have to have a haircut. If you started in 24, you might. The last way you avoid the haircut is you meet the domestic content. These are separate rules. They borrow the same thing, but if you want to avoid the haircut, you have to either be small, you have to either be domestically produced, or you started in 2023. Those are the ways to avoid a 10% haircut on not-for-profits, state and local, okay, and energy co-ops. Anybody here do Tennessee Valley Authority? No Tennessee Valley Authority. Well, they also get it as well. There is another haircut. Oftentimes on state and local, tax-exempt bonds are used. And so there could be a haircut there as well. They haven't come out with the rules. Let me see if we're kind of IRS stalkers. It sounds like Ryan might be an IRS stalker as well. Let me get this name right. So he mentioned Lily Batchelder, that we stalk her. Yeah, I'm not going to get it. So there's a chief counsel that was at a conference 2 days ago. Not as fun as this conference, something to do with tax and accounting and things like that. But they said that this chief counsel said that the rules for direct pay are going to come out in about a month. So he said that at the conference, and they'll clarify this tax-exempt bond issue. It can be as high as a 15% haircut, but there's some weird calculation that isn't well described in the law for how to actually do it. But the most it can be is a 15% haircut. Credit transfer. You can transfer your credit. So anybody represent a REIT, real estate investment trust? Real estate investment trusts don't pay taxes, but now they're going to be able to get a tax credit by selling their tax credits. Where can you sell your credits? On a marketplace. And these are the companies that are going to have marketplaces. You should take a picture of this slide, because 3 out of 5 of them will not exist in 2 years from now. There'll be 2 winners, maybe there'll be 1 winner, and you'll go to that site and you'll be able to sell your tax credits. Hopefully they'll be very transparent. You'll see past buys and sells, so you'll know what the marketplace says. Is it a, do you sell it for 70 cents on the dollar? Do you sell it on 80 cents on the dollar, 90 cents on the dollar? We heard rumors that some people that are looking for ESG, they're selling at above 100% on the dollar. It's a rumor. I don't know if it's true, but if somebody's willing to pay 102% for my 100% credit, I'll take that money for sure. So those are going to be the marketplaces. There's probably going to be some other players, but these are the ones that we've been able to find so far. The Inflation Reduction Act didn't just change the ITC Section 48. It also changed 179D. So there are major changes as it relates to 179D. How many people have heard of 179D? Tax deduction. So there's 2 sides to this tax deduction. There's a tax deduction for commercial building owners, and then there's a tax deduction for designers of certain types of buildings. And so with that, we'll go into what the changes are. So these changes only go in effect for projects placed in service after 1/1/2023. So designers, you used to be able to get a tax deduction for your government projects. We have some people that design ground source just for K through 12 schools. They haven't paid income taxes since 2006. They've wiped out their income tax liability since 2006. Now, any of their work on not-for-profits, instrumentalities, and Indian tribal, they won't have to pay. They're the only party that can get the tax deduction for those type building types. You're not supposed to ask. I'm supposed to ask the audience. Does anybody know what an instrumentality is? Does anybody know what an instrumentality is? Do you know what an instrumentality is? Neither do I. That's not 100% true. So what happened to us about 8 years ago, we had a client that did a big project at Penn State. We brought them the government form. On 179D, the government has to sign a form saying that this person is the designer and so on. 20 minutes, good. I saw that joke before. So instrumentality, Penn State turned out to be an instrumentality. They claimed that they can't sign that document because it was only for government, state, local, federal, and political subdivisions thereof, and they claimed that an instrumentality is none of those things. So we got them to put instrumentality in there. Penn State is an instrumentality. We've done other instrumentalities where they were willing to sign it because they thought they were a political subdivision of the state, but Penn State in particular, anybody went to Penn State? So many of the headaches that I got. So that's the answer for instrumentality. That goes not against my 2 minutes. Okay. Tax deduction, it used to be $1.88, now it's 50 cents to $1. It went down. Just like the ITC went from 10% to 6%, it went down. There is a way to boost it. What's the difference between 50 cents and $2.50 and $1 and $5? It's the magic 5-time bonus again. So you can get the 5-time bonus. The problem with 179D's 5-time bonus is we didn't get the 1 megawatt small project provision. So 179D has to have prevailing wage and apprenticeship for you to get that $2.50 or $5. There's another way to get the quality. If you do a retrofit, so you can model, 179D uses energy simulation modeling. You can model your building to get the tax savings. Or now, for retrofits and retrofits only, you can use EUI, which I can never remember what EUI stands for. I have to look at that, energy use intensity. For some reason, I always think it's energy utilization index. But so you have to model your building, or for a retrofit, you can use EUI. The deduction now resets. 179D resets every 3 years for a commercial project and every 4 years for a government or tax exempt project. Okay, to get your 5-time bonus, if you're bigger than a megawatt, or you didn't start it before January 29th, or for 179D, you just didn't start it before January 29th, you have to meet the prevailing wage and apprenticeship requirement. Now, Ryan mentioned the Lilly Batchelder press release. It had a whole bunch of things in order. The next one in order is domestic content, which Dan talked about. After that is direct pay. And the last one is even more rules related to prevailing wage and apprenticeship. They already came out with some, 2022-61. And basically those rules are, you must use prevailing wage, and the way you find out what the prevailing wage is, you go to www.sam.gov, you put in your location and your type of project, and it will list out the prevailing wage for a whole bunch of different trades. Now, if your trade is not there, you have to go to you have to send an email to IRA prevailing wage at DOL.gov. You have to put all that information in your email, and they will issue you a wage determination for the trade that you don't have the answer for. You'll also need to keep records. Who's heard of certified payroll? So certified payroll, I think, goes most of the way for the records that you need. It definitely goes most of the way for prevailing wage. What I don't know that it meets is the apprenticeship requirement. Because on the apprenticeship side, we have to show that 12.5% of total labor hours in 2023 are from apprentices, 15% starting in 2024. But the part that I don't think certified payroll is going to show you is you have to meet an apprenticeship to journey worker ratio on a daily basis. On a daily basis, okay? Your apprentice has to come from a registered apprenticeship program. So you're going to want to find out where your local registered apprenticeship programs are. It can't be that, oh, I hired somebody and I'm calling them my apprentice. They have to actually come from a registered apprenticeship program. And you have to meet that apprentice to journey worker ratio. The registered apprenticeship program is going to be the one that tells you what that ratio is. So let's say a couple of your journey workers are out sick, you know, maybe they caught COVID or something, and now you have too many apprentices on the job site. You kind of have to shut the job site down if you want to meet the daily requirement. And why would you want to meet the daily requirement? So once again, it's that 5-time bonus or higher tax deduction. So you might think, well, if I don't meet it, instead of a 30% credit, I'm going to get a 6% credit. That's very painful. I would say that's very painful. But that's not the only penalty. If you go for the 30% and you fail to prove that you met it, there's a $50 per total labor hour of the project penalty for not meeting it. So if you take your 30 and you're wrong, you have to pay $50 per labor hour of all the labor on the project as a penalty, in addition to being dropped from 30% to 6%. So you got to make sure all your T's are crossed, all your I's are dotted when you take that 30 or 40% tax credit.
All right, good morning, everybody. Dang, that's loud. I apologize. Yeah, Tim Wright, and just thank you for the opportunity to share what we've learned. Jacob, you ever tried decaf coffee? No need. Beautiful job. Thank you. Great information. So just real quick, I'm just going to run through, and Dan did a beautiful job of capturing a lot of this information, but I do want to just pause, because without this, without what I think John Thomas mentioned earlier and Ryan mentioned earlier, we would not be where we are today without the hard-fought win. And the many, many times, the many fly-ins, the lobbyist effort. Dan said it earlier, we cannot take our foot off this gas pedal at all, ever. So this is something we're going to have to maintain on and on and on. But what's incredible is this is revolutionary. It is a game changer for everybody in this room, for everybody across the country. And I know there's some exciting things going on in Canada right now too, so stay tuned on that. Very, very cool. But I will say, what have you heard today? We're waiting for clarity. We're waiting for more communication. And this is a plug for NY-GEO. NY-GEO for across the country, I believe, is the best communicators out of any GEO organization, again, across the country. So Ryan, challenge to you, my friend. Keep on getting the information to NY-GEO, because they will put it out across the country. Hats off to NY-GEO for their monthly communication. It's amazing. So I just want to pass on here what we're going to head into. So everything you've heard, I'm learning about haircuts today, Jacob. Unbelievable. Nice haircuts. But I'm telling you, there's still so much that I'm just saying is clear as mud. It's going to take time for all of this to unpack. And you know what? We only have one option: to continue to press on. I can tell you that we're always in communication with Ryan. We're in communication with the White House. Ryan's in communication with Treasury. We're going to dig in and get dirty, because this is what our industry is all about. This is what we need to continue to learn together. And again, that will get disseminated as soon as we are. Now, Dan touched on this, and I just want to highlight again the bonus structure. And as you see, it's going to continue to ratchet up. So it's not just domestic content now of, wow, okay, we've got to be 40%. That's the threshold. Pay attention to where it's going. This is good for America. This is good for American jobs. So as much as that's another threshold, it's another threshold. Look where we're going. And again, I think it's a beautiful thing from a U.S. content standpoint. Again, Dan touched on it earlier, domestic steel and iron and manufactured products. Dan touched on, again, beautiful job of the 1 megawatt. That was not clear. And there's been a lot of time and a lot of thought and a lot of money put into what that really means. Again, thankfully, we're well connected with Ryan, with GEO, into the ear of the White House, into the ear of Treasury, to make sure that this is favorable for our entire industry. So super excited about that. But again, be careful. The 10% can easily fall back. Dan and Jacob touched on it, back into the 2% range. So this is something we need to pay attention to over time, but you see how the years progress, and the domestic content has to get greater and greater every year. So we will be watching for that. Again, Dan touched on this one as well, but the brownfield sites. I'm telling you, it's amazing when you look at the map. It's going to, I'm sure you looked at the map and said, I had no idea. It can be that specific to a location. So please pay attention to that for this additional bonus credit, as well as, again, the census tract on coal. When did that plant shut down? And by the way, are plants still shutting down today? Yes or no? Coal. Do you think that's going to continue? You bet it is. So that is an ever-moving target, ever-changing target, and it's going to be very, very important to be watching and paying attention to that. So the one thing we just wanted to highlight from a geothermal manufacturer standpoint, again, we're talking about the entire project, but I just wanted to give you a snapshot into what I believe is representation of where is our product coming from. So I just want you to know, so as we have that 40% base threshold right now, 62.8% right now is coming from the U.S. For us to make that geothermal heat pump system, proudly made in America, as many other manufacturers in the room as well. So again, that's good news. That's not something that we're concerned about, but it is something for us to all continue to pay attention to as we move forward, selecting our vendors. Where are these components coming from? So it's very, very important. You see US, Canada, Mexico, and other. And again, this is just a cross-section of a couple different units specifically. Again, we're still waiting for a little bit more Treasury IRS information. Stay tuned. So just in wrapping up, we have all the runway we need. Dan went through it beautifully this morning, all the way back in time. Where are we right now? We've got an incredible runway, 10 plus years. We have the next generation in front of us. So it is the time to dig in. It is the time to really get moving in this industry. And I believe New York, again, with this conference, hats off. Fantastic conference. But we all have to continue to seek clarity. We have to seek consistency. And I think John Thomas said it really, really well at the closing of the last session. Let's do great installations. Let's do snapshot installations, spotlight installations everywhere we go. That's the only way to continue to see geothermal progress. Go back into what Donovan said and how many projects that they've got working on right now. Those all have to be high quality with every partner from designing all the way through completion of installation. So that's a challenge, I think, to all of us, including being a geothermal manufacturer. That's our challenge as well. So I just want to say thank you very much and appreciate the opportunity to share with you today. And again, great job, NY-GEO. Fantastic conference. Thank you, Heather.
And for our panelists who refuse to sit up at the table.
Just wanted to, be able to see the slides. I'm Jamal. I'm with Rewiring America. Thanks for having me. I'm going to talk about the Inflation Reduction Act. I'm going to talk about some of the non-tax provisions because there's a lot in there. So, bear with me. We think the Inflation Reduction Act is going to jumpstart the electrification movement, as many of you do too. All right, so you've heard a lot about the rebates, so I won't cover this in too much depth, but there is a lot that we don't know. In fact, we don't know anything about it except what's in the statute and what's in the administrative law that DOE released like a month ago. So there are electrification rebates. DOE calls them home electrification rebates. It's $4.5 billion total, split amongst the 50 states and territories. And DOE does have the allocations on the website. These are point of sale rebates up to $14,000 for low and moderate income households installing electric products. What does that mean? Heat pumps, generally heat pump water heaters, clothes dryers. It also includes panel upgrades, rewiring. Multi-family buildings can qualify if greater than 50% of the residents are income eligible, meaning they're below 150% of the area median income. There is a contractor incentive of up to $500 per project. And with this rebate, the value of the rebate, so if it's a $14,000 point of sale rebate, nonprofits, other entities can install these projects, but the value has to be passed on to the customer. So the customer has to receive that rebate. These are going to be administered by state energy offices, and there is a set aside for tribes as well. And the reason why we don't know a whole lot about the program is because DOE hasn't released guidance on the program, and because state energy offices are going to be administering them. So effectively, there's going to be like 56 plus different plans. So we're going to have to stay tuned for that. I glossed over this, but it's important. The project cost for low-income households, 80% or below, 100% of the cost can be covered. For households between 80 and 150% of area median income, half the cost can be covered. You may have also heard about the home efficiency rebates. These are not point of sale. These are rebates tied to the amount of efficiency or energy savings that you get with the project. There's two pathways. There's a modeled pathway, so you can project how much, how much in terms of energy savings the project will get. And you can either get $8,000 or $4,000 for that, or you can go the measured savings pathway, which I think Congress might have preferred because that pathway for the rebates are uncapped up to 50%. Multi-family buildings also qualify. There's no requirement to pass rebates on to the consumer. There's no set aside or requirement to serve low-income households. There's also a $200 contractor incentive, but only for projects located in disadvantaged communities. And it remains to be seen how disadvantaged communities is going to be defined. Obviously, New York has its own definition. The CGES tool at the federal level is a useful tool, but because it's also administered at the state level, it just remains to be seen how disadvantaged communities is going to be defined. There is the $200 million related but separate pot for workforce development. We don't really know anything about that. Is it going to be competitive, or are they going to be formula-based? We're not sure. But $200 million is not a lot, for states. So that money has to be used very efficiently in order for it to go as far as we think it can go. All right, there's some additional buildings-related incentives that we'll talk about. There's $1 billion at the Department of Housing and Urban Development. This is for efficiency, electrification, and resilience in privately owned affordable housing properties. So we've talked a lot about affordable housing at this conference, which is great. And so this $1 billion with an additional authority to subsidize $4 billion in loans, which is, I think is pretty significant. For any privately owned affordable housing property to make, again, electrification retrofits, resilience, or efficiency. And it's a broad terms. So we don't know exactly what specific technologies or measures are going to be covered under that. HUD hasn't released guidance on this program yet, but I suspect that this program, individual projects will apply to HUD for a portion of the 1 billion or 4 billion. So it'll be a sort of an individual project application. Public housing is not included as part of that, so it's just privately owned. There are energy code funding, so another billion. There was a $1 billion through the infrastructure law for codes, and I think that was just, actually the applications are still open for that. I think I think it closed. But there's another $1 billion through the IRA for both establishing codes as well as implementing codes. So establishing, implementing, and enforcing as well. There's a little portion there about enforcement. And this will be administered both to states and local governments. Cool. So you may have also heard about the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund. It's the largest non-tax program in the IRA. There's $27 billion total for this pot of funding. It's effectively supposed to be this like revolving fund. So projects will be, or funding will be dispersed as a loan, and then the payment, it's sort of like it's sort of like the Green Bank. So you put out money, and then those repayments go towards funding future projects. This is also pretty broad in terms of scope in measures that can be supported, as long as it's reducing emissions. Effectively, anything can go, and so we're trying to make sure that there's a broad but narrow definition of that, because we don't want some of the sort of false solutions that we believe people might want to apply for. So geothermal is definitely a qualified project because it does reduce emissions. There was initial guidance released in February. I think these slides are going to go out, so you can view that. And then the implementation framework was just released as well, and I'm going to talk about what that looks like. So it's $14 billion for something called the National Clean Investment Program. This is 2 to 3 awards for like national nonprofits to support smaller entities like community development, financial institutions, CDFIs, or supporting green banks to do what they're already doing, which is supporting community development projects or financing clean energy projects in communities. There are green banks at the state level. There are some green banks at the local level. This $14 billion is supposed to go to 2 or 3 national entities that would then support those smaller entities to continue to do what they're doing. The $6 billion is, hub nonprofits. These terms are funny. But these are supposed to provide support to CDFIs, green banks, other financing type entities as general assistance to help them do their jobs better. So they're both broad, as you can see. And then there's a separate $7 billion for solar, just in case you were interested. And that is for states, tribal governments, municipalities. There's really a broad range of applicants that can apply for that. And I think this might be my last slide, but just flagging that there are 3 programs also designed to reduce pollution. The climate pollution reduction grants are for both states and metropolitan statistical areas, which I'm sure many of you know what that is, but they're effectively like metropolitan areas that can cross different jurisdictions. So, for example, like Philly, Camden is sort of like a metropolitan statistical area. Newark, New York City. So there's about $5 billion total for that program, $250 for planning, and then $4.75 billion for implementation. So states and metropolitan statistical areas over the next year or so are going to be working on plans for how they can reduce pollution in their area, in their geography, and then they can then apply for a portion of the 4.75 billion to implement a portion of that plan. So it's a really flexible pot. Building electrification can be part of it. Supply side decarbonization can also be part of it. The environmental and climate justice block grants are largely for like partnerships with nonprofits, nonprofit entities, so local governments can partner, companies can partner, and the idea is to propose a project that will help address some sort of environmental or climate justice issue. So like heat islands are part of it, air pollution, there's a really broad definition there too. And then there's money for schools. It's $50 million, it's not a lot, but just flagging that it's there. And I think, yeah, then there's a bunch of tribal programs. There's a tribal electrification program, a climate resilience program, and a Native Hawaiian climate resilience program, all of which are super broad. In fact, the text that's here is all the text that was in the law, so it's really, there really wasn't a lot of information about these. And then we have a calculator if you haven't seen it. If any of you in your personal lives are looking to electrify, we have this tool that will project how much you can save or get through IRA incentives, such as the 25C tax credit, 25D tax credit that I know Heather is very familiar with. There you go. Great point. You just click on that. It's rewiringamerica.org, and you'll see the try our calculator on the site. You click on that, and it'll take you. Thanks, Bill.
Great, thank you to our panelists. So I'm hoping we have some questions. We only have a few minutes left in our scheduled time, but we do have a coffee break after this, so we'll probably run a few minutes long for anyone who wants to stay for a few minutes. I just want to recognize that all four of these folks are like way, way, way down deep into the details, and they could have talked for 3 or 4 times as long on their specific areas of expertise, so please use them as a resource and come up and talk with them afterwards. I do want to give Rewiring America a shout out because we have been harassing them frequently for the last year to make sure that geothermal is right there with air source heat pumps and all of their amazing public communication across the US, and they have taken that on, and we are very grateful for the shout out in the calculator. You can see your geo heat pump. So question in the back?
Yeah, the point that you discussed about the 75% total annual energy load, can you discuss that in more detail on how you would meet the incentive to get that? Because like what is 75% of the total annual energy load? And I guess that assumes then you get to write off all the equipment downstream of the heat pump?
Yeah, that would relate to what's called the dual use part of the system. So everything from the geothermal source, up through the heat pumps, unless you're injecting the energy in the water feeding the heat pumps, that would be a gray area, because I don't know how they could exclude any part of the geothermal heat pump, but essentially any part of the system that's using energy from a source other than geothermal to produce heating or cooling in the building would be their target. So typically it would be the distribution side of the system, especially if you had a central plant and you had a boiler backing up your central water-to-water system that's producing hot water. Could be distributed to the same fan coils and piping or radiant floor system that might serve that portion of the system would be dual use. And it's totally can be part of the system as long as at least 75% of its energy comes from the ground. So your whole well field heat pump, that part is good. It's just the distribution part would be subject to this, and 75% of the annual energy, you'd have to use a lot of other energy. It'd have to be a quite small geothermal system where you put in a lot of supplemental energy not to get into that problem. But also I will say, even if you do reach, let's say, 85%, you only get to deduct in your system cost 85% of that part of the system. So instead of 100% of all this, that part would only be whatever percent it supplies that comes from the ground. So they prorate it. Now, this is old law. It's just all we have. I hope they simplify it, and it's not going to be like this, but this is what they wrote in 1978 through 82, and at this point, it's the only thing we have that stands as a precedent, which is kind of how law works. So it's not, you know, ironclad that this is it, but I would just say if I was talked to a lot of developers, and they're talking about systems that would include a lot of fossil fuel potential energy, or even, you know, electric energy, you know, not coming from the ground. If you start exceeding a threshold of it, you would, you know, don't count on your distribution system to be included. And I guess it would say, you know, and I don't know. You're better off trying to put your alternate energy as close to the other source of energy. I'll call that the alternate now. How about that? The non-geo part, as close to the end zone as possible. So if you had like a boiler with some radiators around the windows, you know, just that way your whole geothermal part would be fine. It would just be that part of the system that would not be part of it. So there are ways to get around that. It's not simple, and again, we don't think it has anything to do with rejecting heat. So systems that would have a cooling tower, that shouldn't matter because you're just throwing heat away. They're worried about bringing in heat from essentially non-renewable sources, and so.
Hi, Lauren Kroll from Sustainable Westchester. I'm just curious to hear from all of you about what the key leverage points are for wraparound services that you see in the Inflation Reduction Act, because that's something that's really missing from the incentives and could be really crucial, especially for, you know, low to moderate income folks that are receiving a lot of the benefits in the legislation as well. And otherwise, it's going to be hard to reach those electricity load needs for, you know, commercial properties, or, you know, get the decommissioning underway, especially if it's, you know, going from an oil system to a new electric system or something like that. Thank you.
Before you put the mic down, could you maybe go deeper on what you mean by wraparound services?
Yeah, so when I talk with homeowners a lot, I guess one of the key things that comes up a lot is with oil tank removal, or, you know, decommissioning of, say, radiators or something like that. Obviously, you know, the $8,000, say, for the point of sale rebate can't cover the entirety of those costs, and that could also include, you know, if there's any leakage or spillage. There's not a lot of grants right now for, you know, site cleanups or anything like that, which is often on the homeowners or the property owners to pay. So, yeah.
Yeah, I would just say there's not a lot of opportunity in the IRA, but if there is, I would look at some of the flexible funding, such as, you know, the Climate Pollution Reduction Grant, which, you know, the state or the metropolitan statistical area would be the ones to put that in the plan and propose that as a project, or the Environmental and Climate Justice Block Grant. Like, those would probably be the two, but you would, you know, either as a nonprofit, you know, apply for something like that specifically to the Environmental and Climate Justice Block Grant, or you know, convince your government to, you know, to go for that.
Okay, I work with Siemens. It would seem like you brought up the lobbying efforts. We have national lobbyists and all the rest of stuff. Why don't we work together? Someone talk to me afterwards and I'll help pull that together, all right?
Great question. Thank you. Why don't we work together? Pretty simple.
Ryan, see Ryan in the last over there, talk to him, he's the guy to ask. After
Thank you. Thank you.
we should.
Talk about tax stuff.
So I have a couple questions. I have to pick the right one now. So I live in the East Village, and they just cut down half of the East River Park, and we're finding out that we knew that it was a manufactured gas neighborhood from Stuytown all the way down, but now we're seeing that there's a good chance that something has been exposed from the excavation. the plan is to build a wall. And I'm wondering what does it take to get the EPA to declare a brownfield in order for us to take advantage of this exposure that's, been a heartache for everybody? We want to make something good out of it. And then I have another question, but I think I'll catch you at lunch for that one. Okay.
I don't know if anybody on the panel has an answer on that one, but the first thing I would say is contact your local EPA. It may already be a brownfield.
States have DEQ, basically the localized versions would be best place to start. Start with your local environmental quality.
Yeah, the Deese.
Everybody's got their own names for that. Department of Well, they declare new ones all the time. It's not like they had to be legacy from decades ago. I mean, and when one's found or created, they can do that. So, I mean, I don't know what the process is. Usually it's the other way around. They come in and make it one and say, you guys can no longer do normal things here. We've decided this isn't a good spot, so, I mean, it can come either direction. They force it or somebody could ask for it, which that's probably kind of new.
Do we have one more question before we wrap up?
I came in a little late, so you may have already answered this, but are there double dipping restrictions between state programs and federal programs? Like the Clean Heat program, state program, and would it be different for a tax credit or a rebate, at the federal level? And also things like historic tax credits. I mean, are people going to be able to go after both, historic tax credits and these tax credits? And I know it's complicated.
You're going to hate this answer. It depends. Each program, some of them you can take the federal credit and that program. Some of them, it specifically says in the program you can't do the federal credit. So each one, it depends. And so, sometimes it's really hard to even dig into the programs to find out which side of it depends it falls on, because they don't make it very clear. So I recommend getting a good tax advisor.
One addition I'll say, the non-tax part of the IRA, or the tax part of the IRA does not reference the non-tax part of the IRA and vice versa. And I think the reason is, bird rules. I don't know, I'm looking at Ryan, but so there's no prohibition on rebates being stacked with tax credits, at least that we know of, unless guidance is released saying otherwise. For both the rebates that I mentioned, there is in the law a prohibition on combining both rebates for the same measure. So you wouldn't be able to, like, let's just say the cost of a heat pump is $10,000. You wouldn't be able to claim the full $8,000 in the electrification rebate, and then also $2,000 from the home efficiency rebate. That would be prohibited, but you can use the electrification rebate for the heat pump, and then the efficiency rebate for weatherization measures. So you could do that. I suspect that you will be able to stack federal rebates with other federal programs. In fact, I really am 99% sure of that. And also stack federal rebates with state and local incentives as well. So there's no prohibition on that, at least from the federal side. I think if there is a prohibition, it'll be on the state and local side, if there is any.
Great, thank you. And we're just going to have one last comment from Dan, and then we're going to wrap up.
I just wanted to put one, we're hearing all these, details, and it sounds, like it's so complicated to do all this. And I will say, if you're applying for grant type money, you have to, you typically bill almost like a business case for, your proposal, and, you're competing. Those are complicated. But claiming the ITC couldn't be more simple. It's one line, you know, you have a form, 3462, it's got one line, how much did you spend on geothermal heat pump property? And it says retain for your records any documentation you might need, but all you put is one number on one piece of paper. The residential 25D, form 5695, one number on one piece of paper. It's not hard to claim this. People are shocked how easy it is. It's not like applying for grants, which is very complicated, and I'm glad they have all that in there. But, you know, you end up spending a lot of money, and you know, people don't have time necessarily to fill all that out. It's important. I'm not saying it's not, but this part is very, very easy. Now, as long as you're, you know, below 284 tons or 285 tons, and it's just fill out that piece of paper. If you want the domestic content, there'll be a little more paperwork, or if you want the energy community. But the basic ITC, it couldn't be easier. I don't know of any other way easier to tap into money for a project than filling out one line on one piece of paper, and that's it.
Awesome. Great. Thank you, everybody. Thanks for coming. Enjoy the rest of the conference.